And good evening. I'm Phil Lipoff at ABC News headquarters in New York. We are coming on the air because we are learning that a regional jet has gone down near Reagan National Airport there in DC. You're looking at the Potomac and you're looking at a response, a massive response to this incident. I want to go to aviation expert right now, Steve Ganyard. Steve, talk to us about what you know right now.
Phil, the White House has confirmed that a U.S. Army H-60 Black Hawk helicopter collided with this regional jet. The regional jet was on approach to runway 33 at Reagan. So if you've been to DCA before, you know that there are multiple runways, and most of the time when you land on a larger aircraft, you're landing on the long runway, which is almost north-south. But there are a couple of shorter runways that are used for the smaller regional jets. Runway 33 is one of those. So if you are at Reagan National and you are on runway 33, you would sort of be pointing up towards Northwest DC, towards National Cathedral, towards the Kennedy Center. So apparently coming in over the Potomac on a final approach, for some reason, the Army helicopter was in a place where it shouldn't have been, and that is anywhere near an approach corridor at Reagan Airport. So a couple of things to think about here. As you know, Phil, anybody that's been to Washington, D.C. understands that there are helicopters flying around all the time. Military helicopters, park police helicopters, security helicopters, private helicopters, but they're all supposed to stay down low. So if you've ever come in over the bridges that connect Washington with Virginia, you know that there are always helicopters flying quite low because they are staying below the airplanes that are landing at Reagan. So why this Army helicopter was there, why this collision occurred, is something that the investigators will have to unearth here over the coming weeks as they figure out what caused this tragedy.
Steve, we know that air traffic control is in contact with the airplanes that are coming in to an airport. What's the contact like with helicopters, and in this case, especially a military helicopter?
Yeah, the transponder of the helicopter should have been on, but there are what they call visual flight rules, where you don't have to be in radar contact. And those are sort of corridors that go down the Potomac and around Washington, D.C. And so there are places where you can fly and not be in positive control, meaning that you're talking to an air traffic controller. The transponder on the helicopter should have always been on. Sometimes when they're really low, that transponder, because the radar doesn't see, the radar is looking up like this, it may not see that transponder. And also that the air traffic controller is just assuming that that helicopter is going to stay within the rules and stay below the flight path coming in this case, to runway 33. So why that wasn't the case, why that helicopter was up where it shouldn't have been, is the big question. But it does seem to be that that's what led to this tragedy tonight.
And Steve, you're talking about that transponder. Is there any way that the pilots of that plane or the pilots of the helicopter would have had any kind of notice that this was about to happen? You're saying the transponder wouldn't be up on the helicopter. How about the plane?
No, and Phil, remember, these are small aircraft, and a helicopter doesn't have air-to-air radar. It's not like a fighter jet that would see other traffic out there. It's not like a commercial airliner that has this system called TCAS. Remember that we covered a story recently in Phoenix where two aircraft came very close to each other on final going into Phoenix, but the onboard system told them to move away from each other. You don't have that sophisticated system within a military helicopter like the H-60, even though you would have it on the regional jet. So why the system didn't pick up the Army helicopter, whether it was too low, whatever the reason, the crew in the regional jet was obviously preoccupied. It's night. You're coming in over water, so you have to be sort of on instruments. But the weather here tonight in D.C. is good, so it's probably a visual approach. It's very disconcerting to fly over water because you have no sense of depth perception. So the crew was probably quite busy. They're landing on a crossing runway at night, trying to pick up the visual cues, and they may not ever have seen a helicopter. I can tell you that in my flying career, many times I almost had mid-airs with helicopters because you just don't see them at night unless you have night vision goggles. And in this case, obviously the regional airliner did not.
Steve, just quickly before we bring Sam Sweeney in, this H-60 Black Hawk, what do you know about it? How many people, military personnel, can be on it?
Usually, Phil, you're going to have 2 pilots and at least 1 crew chief. You can have upwards of 9, 12 people on board. But generally, when they fly around D.C., they are not. They're probably out doing training. Maybe they were doing some sort of night training, getting night minimums. But we just don't know whether this was a training mission, whether they were transporting people. Where were they going? Were they coming from some place within Washington and going back to a base, or were they just transiting the area? All these are questions yet to be determined.
All right, and we have a lot of questions about this regional jet that was involved as well. I want to bring in transportation reporter Sam Sweeney. Sam, what do we know about this regional jet?
Phil, the plane was coming in from Wichita, Kansas. As Steve said, it was on final approach when this collision happened, and we're getting video from the nearby Kennedy Center. This is going to be a major incident. This was an MH-60 helicopter. Typically, these are used for transporting VIP people around the D.C. area, and there are a lot of these helicopters constantly flying. And the runway, the main runway at Reagan National, is the single busiest runway in the country. For years, lawmakers and leaders here in the area have been talking about how busy this is and freeing up some space. You know, it is a very tightly controlled airport, limited space, and the planes come in very quickly, and they have very limited time between them. They're going to be looking at all of that. We don't know exactly how many people are on board, but this plane roughly has 70 seats on board and has a crew of a pilot, a first officer, and at least 1, but likely 2 flight attendants on board.
Sam, you fly out of this airport all the time. It's not unusual, as I've been there, to see helicopters flying in and around. But something like this, I mean, there's traffic like this in the air over DCA, over airports here in New York like this all the time. How unusual is it, even for a helicopter and a plane, to get this close, let alone hit?
I mean, there is required, minimum distances, but keep in mind, as you said, the Coast Guard has a base there. They're flying their helicopters in. The Pentagon is not far away from Reagan National Airport. They're flying their VIPs in and out all day long, and these helicopters go up and down the Potomac all day long, moving government officials around. And if you take a look, you back up. Aviation in the United States is the safest it has ever been. This is the first serious, deadly crash on a U.S. commercial airliner in the United States since 2009, when the Colgan airplane crashed in Buffalo. There have been smaller incidents. Asiana plane crash in San Francisco at the end of the runway, where 2 people were killed. But this is the first major incident, and we are told by multiple sources that there have been water rescues, multiple people pulled from the water, and that there are likely multiple fatalities right now.
All right, I want to turn to Aaron Katersky. Sam, stay with me along with Steve. Aaron Katersky is here with me at the news desk here in New York City. Aaron, what are you learning? You just heard Sam talking that there will no doubt, I mean, there are 70 seats likely on this plane coming into Reagan at a relatively early hour in the evening.
It was operating as an American Airlines regional flight from Wichita into Washington, D.C. when it collided with this military helicopter. It is expected there are going to be a significant number of casualties. We understand, though, that there are water rescues taking place, and that is the priority right now. Beyond what caused it and all that, the priority is to try to save any lives that can be saved. There will also be undoubtedly, Phil, a number of dead as well.
We've heard from the White House, the press secretary. The White House press secretary has told us the president has been briefed. I've seen J.D. Vance, the vice president, has put out a call for prayers on his X account. But Aaron, what do we know about the response? Obviously, this is a massive response that we're looking at on the banks of the Potomac, right at Reagan International Airport. Of course, the first thing that they're going to do is try to save everybody. Are we in contact with any of the first responding agencies?
We are, and they are still trying to get a handle on the situation as we are, but we know divers are in the water right now. They are desperately searching for any survivors that they can find. The Potomac has been iced over for weeks. It was just now starting to thaw as it climbed into the 50s in Washington, D.C. today, but the water is still extremely frigid, Phil.
Steve, are you still with us?
I am, Phil.
All right. Steve, talk about what happens in the immediate aftermath of an incident like this, of a crash like this. The plane was relatively low at the time.
It was, Phil, and there's some really disturbing video that appears to be taken from the Kennedy Center that appears to show a flash at impact, and that seems to have occurred at probably 150 feet above the water, and so that is very disturbing, and that does not bode well for survivors. As Aaron notes, the water's quite cold. The ice has just begun to break up on the Potomac, and so getting anybody that might have survived out of the water is what's going on right now. Phil, as you know, at airports like LaGuardia and DCA, you have emergency crews that have to be able to respond both to mishaps on the runway or around the airport in the vicinity on land, but also on water. So we're seeing a lot of pictures right now of boats and flashing lights and emergency vessels out on the water looking for people to rescue. And so Reagan National, just like LaGuardia, just like SFO, are all very prepared to handle mishaps. But I think in this case, what's most disturbing is that we do see indications that there was a bright flash at impact, and it appears the regional jet dropped very quickly into the water thereafter.
Yeah, Steve, just to let you know, I put my eyes on that video before, just before we came on the air. And you know, we have a visual verification team that is going, you know, to be looking at that. But the video you're describing, you can see a light in the air, which appears to be the helicopter because it was moving, you know, much slower, and you can see it. And the plane was just coming in. And then there is that flash, which seems to be an explosion, and you're right. I don't know if it was the helicopter or the plane, but something fell probably together very quickly, and it didn't. If you're saying 150 feet, it went down into the water pretty quickly. But what are the ramifications of that impact? That is what we're seeing in the sky.
Yeah, you know, it all goes back to what both Sam and Aaron have been talking about, how crowded the airspace is around D.C. But there are rules. If you're going to fly around, in some cases with some of the military folks, you have to have special qualifications. You have to be certified to fly around the White House or around the restricted areas around D.C. And so why this helicopter was up, the only thing I can think of, Phil, is runway 33 is rarely used. It's not something that if you were even if you were flying around DCA, you would not think that runway 33 would be in use. It's usually the main north-south runway, or there's another runway when the winds are off that lands towards the southeast. And so perhaps, like I'm only guessing here, perhaps this helicopter crew thought that, well, this runway's not in use, and so perhaps we can climb up a bit and not have to stay in this corridor. But that's the only potential explanation that I can think of at this point of why this helicopter might have been up into the approach corridor. Phil, I'll go back and talk a little bit about having flown in a fixed-wing airplane and been around helicopters at night, and even flying helicopters and flying around other helicopters at night, particularly in the around a city where you have lots of lights, and so you have what pilots call light pollution. And so the bright lights drive down the gains in your eyes, so the ability of your eyes to be able to pick up dim lights. So if, let's say, for instance, if this had been close to an airport, say, in the middle of the country or way out in the middle of the prairie where you didn't have as many lights as around, perhaps the helicopter would have been more easily seen. But anytime you have a helicopter which has very dim lights flying over that black water at night where you can't pick up any depth perception, and you have lots of bright lights of the city behind it. So you think about this, and as they were landing over the Potomac, Phil, they were pointed right at northwest Washington, D.C., with the lights of downtown just off the right side of the airplane. And so all those bright lights, and they're looking out and looking to try to pick up the visual cues to land on this runway over a very black water with no reflection, and so an inability to see a small object flying beneath them or even at the same altitude. I've seen it before, and it's a classic mishap where something crossing at night, where your peripheral vision at night is not very good, and you just don't see it, and it leads to tragedy. And this is not the first time it's led to tragedy, where you have mid-airs between either helicopters or helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft at night.
We're just getting word from Kansas Senator Roger Marshall saying that he believes there are about 60 passengers on board that plane that was coming into DCA. I want to bring in Rachel Scott right now, who's in Washington. Rachel, I know that the president has been briefed. I've seen the vice president's tweet. What else can you tell us happening in Washington right now?
Yeah, right now, Phil, we are learning that President Donald Trump has been briefed on this situation. The White House press secretary did confirm what she believes that they are hearing, that a military jet collided with a regional jet near Washington, D.C. She said at this point, that's all she can confirm right now. We are seeing some statements from Vice President J.D. Vance asking for prayers for everyone that's involved in what he calls a mid-air collision near Reagan Airport this evening, that they're monitoring this situation. I will also tell you, Phil, we're learning tonight that Secretary Sean Duffy, the Transportation Secretary, he was just sworn in a few hours ago. He has now released a statement saying that he's on the site at FAA headquarters, that he's closely monitoring this situation. We're also learning tonight from Senator Ted Cruz telling us that they're expecting that senators will be receiving a briefing tomorrow on what exactly happened here. Ted Cruz is the committee chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee. And as you mentioned, we are hearing from a range of elected officials, members of Congress, Senator Jerry Moran to Roger Marshall. You just mentioned Roger Marshall saying that he believes that this plane was carrying roughly about 60 passengers. In his statement tonight, he says there are no words that can make telling this story any easier. I ask for the world to join me in praying for Kansas this evening, the first responders, the rescue crews, and all that are involved in this horrific accident, Phil.